Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. John Kelly Profile here, and welcome. Welcome to today's show. We think you're going to find it very interesting. And hang in there with us. I believe you will leave with some interesting points. It's a little educational today on various killers, serial killers in general. It's called Killer Eyes, talking about the visual primary intake sense. And today we're going to be talking about Kohberger and Heuermann, among a couple others too. But the disclaimer I want to put out there is for Kohberger and Heuermann. Kohberger and Heuermann definitely are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I've got to put that out there. There's no question about it. So we're going to have to look at them as innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. What I want to really bring out is a saying. I thought it was the coolest, one of the greatest sayings, and it came out in Silence of the Lamb years ago. Anthony Hopkins brought out and said, "We covet what we see." Since I've been doing this for the last 25 years, I don't think there's anything truer than that. We covet what we see, because we know that a lot of the serial killers we've seen over the years do a lot of voyeurism type things. They're always looking, they're real lookers, and it eventually ends up with the stalk, the abduction, the control, and then the murder, right? So we covet what we see. Very important. You guys remember that saying by Anthony Hopkins, those words by Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, as we move on today. Also, I want to thank everybody for purchasing my book, Discovering Lazarus. Thank you so much for all your purchases, for your kind comments, and all your great feedback. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of John Kelly, here it is in this book. You know, how I was really strung out on cocaine, turned my life around, got into recovery, became a counselor, then a psychotherapist, and moved on to become a profiler. Again, thank you so much. We truly appreciate your feedback and comments. And make sure you subscribe and leave comments today, because we'll always get back to you. You guys know that, and we're very, very interested in what you have to say on what we're talking about today. I want to bring out right now our strongest and heaviest condolences to the victims and the families that are supposedly of suspect Kohberger and suspect Heuermann. Okay, Kohberger and Heuermann are, suspected murderers, and we want to bring out our deepest condolences to the victims, the families, and all their friends as well. We're truly sorry about what happened to your loved ones, and I don't think words can say enough. It's really heartfelt. Okay, we seen this so many times and been through this so many times over the years. Just God bless you all. You have to understand about being visual, and we believe Kohberger's visual, we believe Heuermann's visual. And when I say visual, what I'm talking about is a primary intake sense. Now, we all have primary intake senses, right? That doesn't mean we don't use other senses. And to be more exact, for instance, today we're focusing on visual primary intake senses. Well, as it goes, just because somebody has a visual primary intake sense doesn't mean they don't use their auditory sense, or doesn't mean they don't use their feeling sense, their kinesthetic sense. Most people do. There's no question about it. But I have found in my research over the years that the vast majority of predators are extremely visual. There's some in there that's auditory, that use their auditory senses, but the primary intake sense that they use is visual. So the vast majority of predators are extremely visual. There are some that are auditory, that are good talkers, The visual people usually are going to be more focused. For instance, if they want to get in touch with somebody, they're going to send a letter or something like that. If they want to talk to police, they'll usually do it in writing, or they'll get out to the newspapers with a letter or something like that. Auditory people, auditory killers who prefer talking will get on the phone. And I've had a situation over in England with Colin Ireland, the killer of gay men over in Ireland, or I'm sorry, England, not Ireland. His name was Colin Ireland, though. And, he was calling the cops and taunting them, half in the bag after he, killed these gay men. Well, eventually, guess what? They figured it out. They were going to tap the call, and they ended up arresting him, and off he went to prison. Okay. So you have to understand that people, for the most part, we have a primary intake sense. There's one intake sense we favor and use probably more than the others. Okay. And especially if it's visual, a lot of us will be focused on, looking at pictures, reading, writing, in that respect. I think we're going to break the numbers down for you later on what the public is. I mean, the vast majority of people throughout the United States, and I guess throughout the world, are visually oriented as a primary. But then getting into secondary and a third sense, you got to be looking at auditory or kinesthetic. Okay. Some people are auditory, like I said, and some people are kinesthetic, more feelings oriented. In fact, let me give you a quick breakdown in that so you know, okay? You're going to be looking at approximately, let's see where I have it here, 65% of the general public is visual. 65%. It's quite a few people. 30% are auditory, and about 5%, give or take, are kinesthetic, which is feelings oriented. All right. So you have to understand that the visual primary sense, intake sense, is for the majority of people. And definitely, I'd say 98% of killers definitely are visual. Nothing to even talk about or compare it. And I have done this research for over 20 years. And I've done this because before I even thought about becoming a profiler, I was extremely well trained in neurolinguistics and primary intake senses before I decided to make my movement to profiling. I felt it would just help the profiling effort, and I was right. Okay. When you hear about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, you might be thinking about Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is a very well-known motivational speaker. He's very well known. He's a billionaire over and over, and he's made all this money with motivating people through doing workshops, seminars. He's written books. He's got recordings out there. He's done shows. He's been all over the place. He's classes that really, really are very helpful for people that are interested in this. And they're not cheap, but they're very, very helpful. He's very good at what he does. But he didn't create neurolinguistic programming. Neurolinguistic programming was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They are the two professors. They're the two real geniuses behind neurolinguistic programming. And I give them a lot of credit because I find it very, very useful. I think all counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists should have some kind of background in it. Definitely profilers should have some kind of background in it. And I think a lot of detectives are starting to come around there. Some smart homicide detectives have already jumped on that wagon and are trained in it. It's a short period of training, but very instructive and very powerful to really understand and learn this stuff. Okay. So, with that all being said, again, focusing on Kohberger and Heuermann to start with today, and I believe the visual primary intake sense, and I'll get into that. Then we're going to be talking with Leah. But just to kind of nail down why it's important to know a killer's primary intake sense or to have an idea of it is because it can kind of lead you in a direction of what kind of work he does. And if you're hunting an unsub, you're looking for a serial killer, and you can kind of pin down, if it's blue collar, if it's white collar, and then kind of get into, is he more of a computer guy? Is he more of an executive type guy? Or is he more of a construction worker, laborer? Is this the type of guy that has to use his eyes with his hands in order to produce his work? I mean, it's very interesting. For instance, a car mechanic that's down in the motor all the time working on the motors, you got to have good eyes. Got to have good eyes. Just to jump away from that for a second to give you an idea of what I mean. Let's say you're after somebody that's a visual or an auditory person, and they have an auditory primary intake sense. Well, then you're probably looking for somebody that's really good talker. Not that some of these serial killers can't be good talkers as well and charming as well. But, as far as primary goes, lots of people usually follow that primary intake sense into the type of career that they want. So somebody that's auditory might be more of a salesman, might be more of a commentator, might be more of a counselor, might be more of somebody that wants to use that auditory sense to make a living. So they're going to be talking a lot to make their living. Okay. Whereas somebody with a visual primary intake sense is going to be using more eyes on to make their living. And usually their career, okay, surrounds their visual primary intake sense. Okay, I hope I'm making sense to you. This could be a little complicated, but you guys can ask questions. Please ask questions. You're smart. We know how smart you are. We have a great, intelligent audience out there. Okay. So anyway, that's where we're headed today. If you take a look just off the top at Kohberger, very, very focused on computers, usually visual people, head in the direction of, some type of computer work. They're usually very good with computers because this is their language. They would prefer more to write than to talk. Okay. So computers usually is one career we look at if we're looking at somebody that's more or less up the line a little bit, maybe a little white collar with a primary visual intake sense. Mr. Kohberger is very, very good from what we understand with computers, and I wanted to even teach law enforcement in rural areas how to use computers. Mr. Heuermann, perfect, visually oriented kind of person. Primary intake sense, certainly visual. Guy's an architect. You can't be an architect, okay, if you do not have a good visual primary intake sense. I have a terrible visual primary intake sense, okay? I'm more auditory, more kinesthetic, all right? So you would never see somebody like me being an architect. An architect has to have good eyes. He's got to be able to look at, see, rationalize in his mind how everything should go, get a picture of it actually in his mind's eye, and then move forward. And, be kind of a pretty structured person as well. But it all goes back to being a very, very visual type of person. And Mr. Heuermann fits the bill perfectly, especially being an architect. You'd never think that by looking at his house, though, would you? That'd throw you off. But it means something to him the way it looks. Believe me when I tell you. All right. And the cases that he is suspected, or the murders he is suspected of doing, I mean, take a look at those. I mean, with a lot of visual people, out of sight, out of mind. So pretty much had them covered over, with, bags and, camouflaged as well. He didn't want them seen. I mean, with a lot of visual serial killers out there, out of sight, out of mind. That's the way they think. Out of sight, out of mind. Okay. And there's a lot of serial killers that bury their victims. And unfortunately, a lot of those victims will never be found because they literally will put the time into digging the grave. Most of them are pretty lazy, and they're not going to put the time into that. They're just going to try and dump a body or hide a body and move on and put some miles and people, because every time you put distance, you're putting people also between the murder site and yourself, the victim and yourself. That's the way serial killers think. Okay. So anyway, that's where we're at for now. I know Leah has some questions about some other serial killers. Leah, go ahead.
Hey, John. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the visual intake sense of a couple other killers here, as you mentioned. Um, so first, I just want to ask about, Gacy here. We're talking a bit about him. Can you tell me where he's coming from?
Well, if you look at Gacy, I mean, Gacy's the epitome, and somebody I looked at very early, and as you know, I corresponded with him through the mail because early on in my career in profiling, I wanted to find out what his primary intake sense was. And with all the paperwork he sent me and all the questions he asked me in that paperwork, you could see it was just loaded and loaded, loaded with all these visual predicate words. So I really didn't even have to get back to him. I could tell right off the hop that he had answered my question just by sending me all this paperwork to fill out. Okay, so he's a very visual guy. Now, also what went along with that, what supplemented that, was don't forget he was a contractor. And I said earlier, you're going to see some of these guys are going to be contractors, carpenters, they're going to be kind of like blue collar guys that work with a hammer and a nail, and they're sawing and cutting, and they might be up roofing or whatever. I mean, they have to have good eyes in order to do that kind of work. I mean, usually. So with Gacy, he was a contractor. He was into building or remodeling, whatever contracting he was doing. He did different types around the area. And then also too, so that kind of focuses on his career. But also, if we take a look at how he'd like to dress up, put the clown outfit on, how he'd like to show up with the kids in disguise, that's all visual. That whole clown outfit kind of thing is very, 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 very visual. So he was very visually focused, and pretty much you can see that he knew how to use different things to get people into his web, to get younger guys in his web. He could show them some marijuana, show them some booze, you know, uh, talk to them about a job. But Gacy, a very, very visual guy. And his artwork. I mean, he did a lot of painting. Visual people are into photography, painting, sightseeing, books. Not saying other people aren't too, but visual people prefer that more so over than somebody that's got a primary intake sense of being auditory or kinesthetic. All right, that's something that's important. So I think that pretty much covers Gacy. There's probably more. I'm just not thinking of it.
Yeah, no, you brought up some good points there. I like the clown thing. I didn't even think of
Yeah.
that visual. The other one here is BTK. What about him?
Well, BTK, he did. You could see that, in his messaging and his artwork. Um, I mean, in his sketches of people, how they were going to be killed, or killings that he did. Um, sending over an email instead of calling. The law enforcement at the time, which got him caught too. I mean, he rather email them if he could, since they led him to believe they couldn't trace an email. So he preferred to email them than get on the phone and make some kind of call from a burner phone or something like that. So he was extremely more visual. He was into animal control, and other aspects of his job was to look at property, to make sure your property was in line, make sure your property was up to code. I mean, that's all visual stuff. Okay. I mean, he wasn't going to get a lot of points, which most of these guys don't get, for being very social. All right. And, they're not really big talkers. Um, and I think BTK is a perfect example of this. He pretty much, is very much into communicating through some form of writing, if he could. And I think he's done some drawings too, and he has his own art. I think morbid art that he treasures, and he's done stuff with in prison. And I'm sure there's other things too that I'm forgetting. But BTK, again, very visual kind of guy. In fact, he left to taunt the police. He left a license with the girl's picture, on it for the police to find, to taunt them, to get back in the news for his own ego. So, you can see he was a very visual predator, and pretty much, um, he coveted what he saw as far as people went, you know.
Um, the other one here I have here is Otis Toole. What about him?
Yeah, Honest Tool, Henry Lee Lucas's partner in crime. I mean, God knows how many people those two killed together. Honest Tool, really known for John Walsh's son, Adam. It's very sad what happened to Adam. And Honest Tool has been believed to be the killer of Adam. And this was surprising to me. I heard he's or was doing a lot of painting. I don't know if he's still alive or not. I don't think he is, but he's doing a lot of painting and sketching while in prison. Doesn't surprise me, because I know a lot of these guys do, because they are so visually oriented, and it's like talented. They have that visual talent. So when they're in prison, they have nothing else to do. So they write, and they write some various stories, maybe to relive, their fantasy. But they're into writing. That's something, or sketching. That's something that's very interesting to them. Sketching, painting, writing, more visual kinds of things while they are in prison and have time to kill, no pun intended. Okay. Uh, so who else do we have on the list?
I have a Samuel Little here. Wasn't he an artist too?
Yeah, Samuel Little, very, very interesting. I'm not sure of his artwork per se to put up for sale, um, or to try and get out there, but he's certainly got a lot of publicity on his artwork because he extremely good sketch artist, and he claims to be the worst serial killer in the United States history. He claims to have killed, I think it's over 93, 95 women. 93, I'm pretty sure. And what he would do for law enforcement, because he had left bodies, dead women all around the country, and he would move on. He's very transient. So the cops really could never pin him down. And most of these victims were drug addicted and into sex work. So, they, I don't think a lot of time was put into the investigation until he finally decided to come forward. He had some illnesses. He was in prison in California, and these illnesses were taking a toll on him, and he was dying. He was dying slowly, but he was dying. And he started to sketch all these women that he had killed over the years. And he would sketch them, and he remembered. That's why these guys relive that fantasy all the time. They never forget these fantasies. You put them in prison, they take the fantasy to prison with them. Like one serial killer said, you might be able to put me in prison, but I still have my memories. And they do. And they use them in prison for various reasons. So anyway, with his memory, he was able to sketch the different victims that hadn't been identified in various areas throughout the country. What I mean by that is most of them were identified on who they exactly were, but their killer was never identified. So the killer was always on the loose. And the cops had many, many open cases around the country. And through these sketches and working with the FBI, they were able, and law enforcement in California, they were able to close a lot of these cases. There's still some that are quite open, that are open out there, but and hopefully they'll be finalized sooner than later. But he was able to, by memory, to convincingly sketch out victims he had killed years and years earlier. And, pretty much close to perfect, the description he gave in his sketch. So, he may be gone, but a lot of his victims, he did help identify through his drawings before he died.
Man, that is shocking right there. All right. One last question I got for you, John, here. I guess, can you tell me a bit about the serial killers you've been in contact with and things you've seen firsthand? I don't know if you have any.
Well, one serial killer, I won't mention his name. There's an investigation going on. But one serial killer who I've spent a lot of years conversing with, has done a lot of artwork. And what's very interesting about this guy, and I think the audience is really going to get something out of this. This is a serial killer who is interested in needlepoint. Yes, needlepoint. Okay. And again, I can't mention his name right now because of the various investigations that are going on, but I can show you a bit of his artwork that he sent me. And let's put that up. Let's put that up right now so we can get a look at that. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we have some needlepoint. And I want you to look at the fine detail that is in this needlepoint. This happens to be done on a pillowcase. For my birthday one year, he sent me this as a present, a pillowcase. And this is his work. Look how fine that artwork is. Look at those birds and how fine he did those birds. I mean, now just think about that, okay? Now, this is a person who really, they don't know how many people he's killed. He's doing consecutive life sentences at this time, but this is what he does in some of his spare time, okay? And you can see how visually oriented in detail he is, okay? He is no exception to the rule. He is an extremely visual predator. There is no question about it. He hunts through his eyes, and he definitely covets what he sees. So I thought you guys would find that interesting. I have a lot more that we'll be showing from time to time. But right now, I just wanted to educate the audience, educate you guys on how visual these guys are. And it's starting to be talked about more and more. You know, we're seeing other channels who've picked up on it. We've known about it for a long, long time, and we've introduced it into our profiling. If you look at any of our profiles, you'll see us pretty much focus in on, you know, somebody being a very visual serial killer. Like I said, the vast majority are, but there is, you know, a number of serial killers that aren't or don't have a primary intake sense of being visual. Now, something else I want to tell you. Again, I talked about the three primary intake senses. You have visual primary intake sense, auditory primary intake sense, and kinesthetic primary intake sense. That means somebody lives and accesses the world through their feelings. They're a very feelings-oriented type person, okay? That's like 5% of the public. Only 5% of the public, okay, have this kinesthetic feelings intake sense. No serial killer I have ever run into, researched, hunted, ever had a primary intake sense of being kinesthetic, had a kinesthetic intake sense for their primary intake sense. They don't do feelings. They don't do feelings. Now, if you think about that, it makes sense because logically, they don't feel any remorse from any guilt. So that logically tells you they don't have hardly any feelings, if any whatsoever. Where I've seen a tad amount, a small amount of feelings with serial killers is when it comes to their children, when it comes to their families, okay? I've seen this. I've seen, you know, them talking about, you know, the love they have and the feelings they have for their kids. Now, the question I have is, well, you seem so cold over here and you really don't seem to have any feelings at all. I mean, you'd rather drop an ice cream, rather see somebody get hit by a car than have an ice cream cone drop on the ground or something. You know, I mean, you're just that, you know, flat and cold, you know, towards others, especially when you're on the hunt for a woman. You objectify them. You don't even consider them as being human, right? So, you know, what I've seen is this focus on their kids. And we know that they're extremely narcissistic, the vast majority. Okay. And they have a narcissistic personality disorder that's up on the roof somewhere. So, you wonder, and I have just done some research into narcissism by proxy. Narcissism by proxy. Now, what does that mean? I came up with that. What does it mean? It means that it's because of their narcissism that they have something that they believe is feelings for others. So I started to investigate that and look into that. And, I thought to myself, why is that? So I would ask these different serial killers, why do you love your kids? Tell me how and why you love your kids. Tell me how. Tell me how and why you love your kids. That's the question. It's all in the question, right? Well, I see myself so much in my children. I just see myself so much in my children. So is that the narcissism by proxy? He sees himself in his children. So that creates this feeling of love because he's seeing himself and he loves himself, which is usually at the base of narcissism, okay? And a narcissistic personality disorder. I don't know. I got more research to do there, and hopefully more will be revealed. And maybe somebody else wants to consider that and do some research into that and look at narcissism by proxy. I see myself in my kids. That's why I love them. Wow, is that the only reason? Okay, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Leah, thanks for, keeping me on track and, asking these about these other guys, you know, uh, besides Heuermann and Kohberger, again, innocent until proven guilty. And hopefully, our audience got something out of this today. And, all of our detectives out there can take a look at this and think about it and get back to us, give us your comments, give us your feedback. We truly appreciate you. Please remember to subscribe. We love your subscriptions, love your comments. With all that being said, have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Be careful out there. It's a dangerous world we live in today for sure. Who knows what's going on next, right? Many blessings. Take care. And until next time, God bless.